The farmer lived on a quiet piece of land far away from the city. His farm was wide but empty, fields stretching under the pale sky. The soil was tired, the fences broken, and the farmhouse felt too large for just one man. Every day he woke before the sun, worked with his hands, and returned home with only silence to greet him. He often wondered if life would always remain this lonely. One morning, after another long night with no sleep, the farmer sat at his old wooden desk. He stared at a small screen, the kind every village used to share messages and jobs. With a heavy sigh, he typed slowly. Help wanted, farm workers needed, food and shelter provided. It was a simple ad, nothing special, just a farmer's cry for help. He hoped someone strong would answer. Maybe a group of men who knew farming. Maybe someone who could talk to him, so the silence would finally break. Days passed, and the farmer almost forgot about the ad. He returned to fixing tools, feeding animals, and patching the roof. But one evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, a sound broke the stillness of the farm. The crunch of footsteps on gravel, soft but many. The farmer wiped his hands and stepped outside. At the edge of his land stood 5 figures, cloaked in long dark robes. Their shapes were thin, their faces hidden beneath hoods. The air felt colder, the birds had gone silent, and his heart began to beat faster. He called out, "Who are you? What do you want here?" The tallest of the figures stepped forward, her voice low and trembling. "We saw your ad. We need shelter. Please, let us stay." The farmer frowned, confused. These were not the kind of workers he had imagined. He expected rough hands, heavy boots, strong backs. But these figures looked fragile, like shadows drifting in the fading light. The wind shifted, and the hoods fell back. The farmer froze. Their faces were not human. Each woman had eyes too bright for the night, skin with faint silver tones, and marks across their cheeks like glowing rivers. They were aliens. 5 alien women standing on his land. Each face carried sorrow, each gaze heavy with loss. And then the tallest one spoke again. "We are widows, our husbands are gone. We have no home. They cast us out. We beg you, let us stay." The farmer's hands shook. He looked around as if someone else might see this, as if neighbors might appear with torches and shouts. But the land was empty, only him and the widows beneath the darkening sky. His mind screamed at him to send them away. Aliens were trouble, everyone said so. But his heart whispered something else. They looked so tired, so broken, as if the universe had crushed them and left them here by mistake. He swallowed hard and said, "One night. You can stay for one night, nothing more." The widows lowered their heads, whispering thanks in voices that sounded almost like a song. He led them inside, his old farmhouse suddenly filled with quiet footsteps and soft breaths. The rooms that had once echoed with emptiness now carried whispers in a language he did not know. He gave them bread, water, and a fire to sit by. But even as he watched them, unease gnawed his thoughts. Why had they come to him? Why 5 widows, and why now? That night, the farmer could not sleep. He lay awake listening to the old walls creak. Then he heard it, faint whispers outside his window. Not from the women, but from the darkness beyond. He rose quietly, heart pounding. Through the glass he saw shadows moving near the edge of his fields. Figures, watching, waiting. Were they human? Were they something else? He could not tell. The widows were not the only ones who had found his farm that night. The farmer stepped back from the window, cold sweat on his brow. He realized he had made a choice that could not be undone. 5 alien widows slept under his roof, and strangers lurked outside his land. The farm that once knew only silence had become the center of something dangerous. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" But it was too late. The story had already begun. The farmer woke at dawn, his eyes heavy from a night without sleep. He stepped into the kitchen and found the alien widows already awake. They moved silently, their silver skin catching the soft morning light. One of them was stirring a pot of grain, another was mending a torn cloth, while the others quietly arranged the chairs. They looked as if they had lived there for years, yet it had only been a single night. The farmer cleared his throat, uneasy. "You said one night. Now it is morning. You must tell me the truth. Who are you really, and why are you here?" The tallest widow raised her eyes, calm but sorrowful. "We told you the truth. Our husbands are gone. They fought in a war that was not ours, a war between humans and another race. They stood beside humans. They died. And when the war ended, we were cast out. Our own kind said widows bring bad luck. The colonies refused us, so we came here. Her words sank into the farmer like stones. He had heard rumors of battles far beyond his world. He had heard of brave soldiers who fought for peace. But he had never thought their widows would stand in his kitchen, hungry and afraid. Still, doubt pressed at him. Were they victims, or were they hiding something more dangerous? The youngest widow stepped forward, her hands trembling. We are not dangerous. We can work. We can help. Do not send us away, please. Her eyes glowed faintly, shimmering with fear. For a moment, the farmer's heart softened. But outside, he remembered the shadows from last night. Someone had been watching, and he did not know who. He walked to the door and stepped outside. The morning sun washed over the fields, but something felt wrong. The soil carried fresh tracks, heavy boots pressing into the dirt. He knelt and touched the marks. These were not the steps of the widows. These were men's footsteps, coming close, circling his farm, then vanishing into the woods. Someone had been here, spying on them. The farmer returned to the widows, his jaw tight. Someone followed you. I saw tracks. If men from the village know you are here, trouble will come. The widows lowered their heads, sadness in their eyes. One whispered, they never want us to rest, always pushing us away, always calling us cursed. The farmer poured water into cups and sat with them. He looked at his broken fences, his half-dead fields, his empty rooms. He remembered years of silence. Then he looked at the widows, 5 women with nothing but sorrow and strength left. He let out a slow breath and said, you can stay, not just for one night. You can stay if you work, but you must obey my rules. This is still my farm. The widows nodded, relief flooding their faces. One of them whispered, we will not fail you. That day, the farm changed. The widows moved through the land with surprising skill. They lifted stones from the soil, planted seeds with careful hands, and repaired tools with strange alien techniques. By evening, the fields looked alive in a way the farmer had not seen for years. The house smelled of bread, the animals were fed, and laughter, soft, uncertain laughter, rose from the kitchen. For the first time, the farm did not feel empty, but the peace was fragile. At sunset, as the farmer carried wood to the shed, he saw movement at the edge of his land. 3 men stood in the distance, half hidden behind the trees. They whispered to each other, pointing toward the farmhouse. The farmer's chest grew heavy. The shadows from last night were real, and now they had faces. He went inside and barred the door. The widows looked at him, worried. They will not let us stay in peace, will they? One asked. The farmer shook his head slowly. No, they will come back, and when they do, we must be ready. The firelight flickered against the walls. The widows sat close together, and outside, the night grew colder. The farm was no longer just a place of soil and wood. It had become a refuge and a target. The farmer did not know if he had saved 5 broken souls or invited danger to his door. But deep inside, he knew one thing. His life of silence was over. The choice he made this morning would shape every tomorrow that followed. The farmer woke before sunrise, as he always did, but this morning felt different. The sound of soft voices drifted through the halls of his farmhouse, voices that did not belong to him. When he stepped into the kitchen, he found the widows already working. One baked bread, her silver hands moving quickly over the dough. Another swept the floor with long, steady strokes. The youngest widow hummed a low tune as she prepared vegetables from the garden. The home that had always been silent now carried life. The farmer stood in the doorway, watching, unsure. He had allowed them to stay, but part of him still feared his decision. Would they bring danger? Would they draw the anger of the villagers? Or were they truly here to build a new life? The tallest widow noticed his shadow and turned. Her glowing eyes met his, calm and steady. Good morning, she said softly. We will work as long as you allow us. True to her word, they worked. In the fields, the widows knelt side by side, planting seed after seed. They sang songs in a language the farmer did not know, their voices rising like wind over the crops. The soil seemed to welcome them, as if their touch carried hidden strength. By evening, green sprouts pushed from the dirt where once only dust had lived. The farmer walked the rows in disbelief. He had struggled for years, but in one day, they had given his farm hope again. Inside, the widows cooked warm meals and fixed broken furniture. The walls that once echoed with loneliness now carried laughter. It was quiet laughter, careful and shy, but it was enough to make the farmer pause and listen. He felt something stir inside him, something he thought had long died, companionship. But not everyone saw it that way. That week, whispers began to spread through the village. Men at the market spoke of strange lights at the farmer's house. Women whispered of silver-skinned widows who cursed the land. Children dared each other to run past his farm, their eyes wide with fear. Rumor grew like fire, and soon, the farmer's quiet life was no longer hidden. One evening, as the farmer returned from the fields, he found 3 villagers waiting at his gate. They crossed their arms and stared with hard eyes. "You have strangers here," one said, his voice sharp. "Not strangers," the farmer replied. "Workers." "Not workers," another spat. "Aliens, widows, cursed, they will bring ruin, send them away." The widows stood behind the farmer, silent, their eyes lowered. They did not defend themselves. They had heard these words too many times before. The farmer felt anger rise in him. For years, no one had cared about his lonely life. No one had lifted a hand to help him mend his farm. And now, when help had finally come, they demanded he throw it away. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "They are under my roof. They work my land. They stay." The villagers glared, muttering. "This is your warning," one said coldly. "Next time, we will not come with words." They turned and walked into the fading light, leaving silence heavy in their wake. The widows looked at the farmer with mixed eyes, gratitude, sorrow, and fear. "You risk much for us," the youngest whispered. The farmer shook his head. "You gave me back my farm, my home, maybe even my life. That is worth the risk." That night, as the wind howled against the windows, the farmer lay awake. The widows slept quietly in their rooms, yet he could not rest. He thought of the villagers' threats, of the shadows that had watched his fields. Trouble was coming. He knew it. But as he listened to the soft breathing of his new companions, he also knew something else. He would not abandon them, no matter the cost. The days passed, and the farm grew stronger. The widows worked with quiet grace, their hands turning broken land into living fields. The farmer watched as green spread where once only dust had been. The animals grew healthier, the fences stood taller, and the air no longer carried only silence. Yet while the farm healed, the danger outside grew heavier. Word of the alien widows spread through the village like wildfire. Men spoke with anger in the tavern, their voices sharp with fear. "They are cursed," some said. "They will bring soldiers here, they will bring war." Others whispered of strange powers, of glowing marks on their skin. No one spoke of their hard work or their sorrow, only of the fear they stirred. One afternoon, the farmer was mending tools when the sound of boots broke the stillness. He looked up to see a group of men approaching, rough faces set with determination. They carried no weapons in their hands, but their eyes burned with something sharper. The farmer's stomach tightened. He knew why they had come. The leader stepped forward, his voice loud. "We warned you. You keep aliens on your land. You shame this village. You put us all in danger. Send them away now." The widows appeared at the doorway, silent shadows with bright eyes. They clutched each other's hands, but said nothing. They had heard these words before, on many worlds, from many mouths. The farmer stood between them and the men, his voice firm. "They work this farm. They harm no one. They stay." The men muttered, anger rolling through them like a storm. One spat on the dirt. "You will regret this. You think they are workers, but they are trouble. You'll see when it is too late." Another stepped closer, his finger jabbing at the farmer's chest. "Choose, your farm or them. You cannot have both." The farmer's hands tightened on the tool he held. For years he had been alone, unseen, forgotten by the same men who now demanded control of his land. These widows had brought life back to his soil, light back to his home. And yet the village wanted only to cast them away. He took a deep breath and said, steady and unshaken, "I have made my choice. They stay. This is my land, not yours." The leader's eyes narrowed. "This is not finished," he hissed, and with that, the men turned and marched away. The farmer watched them vanish into the distance, but he knew they would return. Not with words next time, but with force. Inside the farmhouse, the widows sat close together, their silver skin catching the firelight. The youngest whispered, "They will come again, they will not stop." The farmer nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we prepare. This is your home now, and I will not let them take it from you." That night, the farm was restless. The wind carried strange cries from the woods. The animals stirred uneasily, and the widows kept close to the farmer. He sharpened his tools, checked every door, and lit lanterns along the fence. The farmhouse glowed like a beacon in the darkness, a fragile island of light surrounded by shadows. As the hours dragged on, the farmer stood at the window. He thought of the life he once lived, silent, empty, forgotten. And he thought of the life he lived now, dangerous, yes, but alive, filled with voices, filled with purpose. He glanced at the widows, their faces lined with fear, but also with quiet strength. In their eyes, he saw not weakness but fire. They had lost everything, yet they still stood, still worked, still hoped. The farmer whispered to himself, "If the village wants a fight, they will not find me alone." And outside, hidden among the trees, the eyes of the outsiders glowed faint in the dark. The storm was not far away. It was already at his gates. The night after the men left, the farmhouse was heavy with silence. The widows huddled together near the fire, their glowing eyes dim with fear. The farmer sat at the table, sharpening an old blade that had not been touched in years. He knew the men would come back, and when they did, words would no longer be enough. At last, the tallest widow broke the silence. "You must know the truth. It is not fair to keep it hidden. If danger comes, you should understand why." The farmer looked at her, his hand pausing on the blade. "What truth?" he asked quietly. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "Our husbands did not just die. They died fighting in the war between humans and the Zoran. They were soldiers, brave and loyal. They chose to stand beside humans. They gave their lives to defend a human world. But when the war ended, no one remembered us. Our own people saw us as cursed, and the humans we protected turned their faces away. We were left with nothing." The room grew colder. The fire crackled weakly. The farmer felt the weight of her words press down on him. He had heard of that war, whispered stories of battles in the stars, of nameless heroes who bought peace with their blood. He never imagined those heroes had left widows behind, and those widows now sat in his home. The youngest widow spoke next, her voice breaking. "We wandered from world to world. No one wanted us. They said we were unlucky, that we carried death wherever we went. We begged, we worked, but doors always closed. Until we saw your ad. It was like a spark of hope, a chance to belong, even for a little while." The farmer stared at them, his heart heavy. He had once thought them strangers, a burden forced upon him. But now he saw them differently. They were not just widows, not just aliens. They were the last living memory of warriors who had saved lives, maybe even his own. He rose slowly from his chair, his voice steady. "You are not cursed. You are not a burden. This is your home now, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise." The widows looked at him with wide eyes, some filled with tears, others with gratitude. For the first time since they arrived, hope flickered in their gaze, fragile but real. But outside, danger was already moving. At the edge of the fields, torches flickered in the dark, voices muttered low and harsh. The men from the village had returned, and they had not come alone. More shadows gathered, carrying sticks, tools, and old weapons. The farmer could hear their footsteps pressing into the dirt, closer and closer. He barred the door, his jaw tight. "They are here," he whispered. The widows rose, their faces pale but determined. They moved quickly, gathering simple tools, ropes, and strange alien devices hidden in their bags. Things the farmer had never seen before, glowing faintly in their hands. One of the widows looked at him, her voice strong. "We will not run again. We are tired of running. If they want to drive us out, they will see we are not weak." The farmer nodded, his chest heavy with both fear and pride. He had never fought beside anyone before, never stood to protect more than his land. But now he would fight for them, for the women who had turned his lonely farm into a home. The sound outside grew louder, shouts rising into the night. The widows tightened their grip on their tools, their glowing marks burning brighter in the dark. The farmer raised his blade, standing at the center of the room. The battle for the farm was about to begin, and as the first torchlight reached the gate, the farmer whispered to himself, "They are not cursed, they are my family now." The night air was sharp, filled with the smell of smoke and anger. From the window, the farmer saw the glow of torches moving across the fields. The men from the village were coming, their shadows long and restless, their voices heavy with threats. They had not come to talk, they had come to drive the widows away. Inside the farmhouse, the widows stood ready. They clutched tools, ropes, and strange glowing devices, small gifts from their lost world. The youngest widow whispered a prayer in her language, her glowing marks flickering softly on her skin. The farmer placed a hand on the door, his blade shining faintly in the lantern light. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "They want to fight, then they will find one here." The first stone struck the farmhouse wall, cracking wood. A voice shouted from outside, "Send them out, or we burn your land." The farmer shouted back, "This is my land. They stay, you'll not take them." Angry roars answered, and then the men rushed forward. The battle began. The farmer swung his blade with fierce strength, blocking the first man to cross the fence. The widows moved beside him, not as soldiers, but as survivors. They used ropes to trip men in the dark, buckets of water to douse torches, and strange alien tools that sparked blinding light. One widow hurled a device into the dirt, and it exploded in a flash, sending attackers stumbling back in fear. Another used her voice, a high strange song that made the men clutch their ears and stagger. The farmer fought with fire in his chest. Years of loneliness had left him hollow, but now he had something to protect. Every swing, every strike was not just for survival, but for the widows who had given him back his life. Blood and sweat mixed on the soil, shouts echoed into the night. The farmhouse shook with the struggle. The villagers outnumbered them, but the widows were clever. They turned farming tools into weapons, a plow into a shield, a hoe into a spear. They used the land itself, leading men into ditches, throwing mud into their eyes. The farm became a battlefield, every corner alive with resistance. The farmer's arms ached, his breath burned, but he did not stop. He saw the youngest widow push a man back with nothing but a wooden staff. He saw another defend the animals, driving attackers away from the barn. Together, they stood as one, not strangers anymore, but family. At last, the leader of the men stepped forward, torch in hand, his face twisted with rage. "This is your end," he shouted, hurling the torch toward the farmhouse. The fire caught on dry wood, flames rising fast. The widows gasped, but the tallest among them rushed forward. She pressed her glowing hands against the fire, and in a burst of light, the flames died. The men stumbled back in shock, fear breaking their courage. Silence fell, broken only by the heavy breaths of the farmer and the widows. The attackers looked at one another, their anger now stained with doubt. The leader growled, but his men pulled him away, muttering that this fight was not worth the risk. Slowly, the villagers retreated into the night, their torches fading like dying stars. The farmer dropped to his knees, exhausted. The widows gathered around him, their faces glowing with both relief and sorrow. They had defended their new home, but they knew this was not the end. More would come, more whispers, more hatred. Yet in that moment, under the silent stars, they had won. The farmhouse stood, scarred but unbroken. The farm still lived, the fields still breathed, and the family inside was stronger than before. The farmer looked at the widows and whispered, "You are not cursed. You are warriors, and this is our home now." The widows smiled faintly, tears shining in their bright eyes. For the first time in years, they felt something deeper than survival. They felt belonging. The night of the battle passed, leaving the farm in uneasy silence. Smoke still rose from broken torches scattered in the dirt, and the fences were scarred from the fight. The farmer stood in the early dawn light, his body aching, his hands bruised, but his spirit unbroken. Beside him, the widows stood tall, their silver skin glowing faintly in the rising sun. They had defended the farm together, and in doing so, something had changed between them. The farmer looked across his land, once empty and lifeless, now alive again. The fields held green sprouts, the barn carried the sounds of animals, and the farmhouse no longer felt hollow. It was not just his farm anymore, it was theirs. The widows walked beside him as though they had always belonged. They touched the soil with care, checked the animals with gentle hands, and repaired what had been broken. There was no fear in their movements now, only purpose. But outside the farm, whispers still spread. The villagers had not forgotten, though many now spoke with uncertainty. Some said the widows were dangerous. Others whispered that they had seen them kill fire with their hands. But a few, only a few, spoke of their courage, of the way they stood beside a human farmer to protect what was his. Change was slow, but the first cracks in the wall of hate had begun to appear. One evening, the farmer sat at the table with the widows, the fire warming their faces. He looked at them one by one, each marked by loss but also by strength. "You came here with nothing," he said, his voice low. "But you gave me back everything. I was alone. Now I am not." The tallest widow placed her hand on his, her glowing marks soft and steady. "You gave us more than shelter. You gave us a home. We are no longer wandering shadows. We are yours, if you will have us." The farmer felt a weight lift from his chest, a loneliness he had carried for years finally breaking. He realized then that he was no longer just a farmer, and they were no longer just strangers on his land. Together, they were a family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by kindness, and by courage. Days turned into weeks, and the farm thrived. The crops grew stronger, the animals healthier, the air filled with laughter. Children from the village, once afraid, began to creep close to the fences, curious of the glowing widows who sang as they worked. Slowly, even some of the villagers softened, their anger replaced by quiet respect, though many still turned away. It did not matter. The farm had become its own world, a place where hope lived again. One night, under the wide sky, the farmer stood with the widows watching the stars. He thought of the ad he had posted, simple words asking for help, never imagining the miracle they would bring. He thought of the loneliness that had once ruled his life, and the laughter that now filled it. The widows stood beside him, no longer outcasts, no longer broken. They had found hope on his land, and he had found family in them. The farmer whispered into the night, "Sometimes the universe gives more than we ask for." And for the first time in years, his voice carried not sorrow, but peace. The farm no longer belonged to a single man. It belonged to all of them, bound together by loss, by struggle, and by love. And under the endless sky, their story had only just begun.